Hello, everybody. This is Joseph P. Farrell with news and views from the Nefarium on Wednesday, July 8th, 2020. I apologize about last week. I forgot to let everybody know there wouldn't be a news and views because of the July 4th holiday. And next week, I am expecting company. So I'll be on a reduced blogging schedule. I will have a blog on Monday and Wednesday, possibly Friday. I don't know yet. But there won't be any news and views next week either. But that may be just as well because I got to tell you, this story has me suspicious. In fact, you can pretty much say that my suspicion meter is in the red zone. Before I get to the story, let's review a little bit of context. If you've been watching China, it's looking a lot like Xi Jinping's government is weak and in trouble and under a lot of pressure. There's a lot of stories that have happened in the last 2 weeks. I've been blogging about some of them on my website. We have the Three Gorges Dam and all the flooding along the Yangtze River and those strange pictures, which the Chinese government is saying are simply the result of processing algorithm problems. But there's been strange pictures of the Three Gorges Dam looking like it's beginning to buckle. I don't know if that's so or not. But in any case, the flooding in China right now is epic. And there have been indications from Taiwan that some people within China are, in fact, beginning to think that the dam might fail. We'll see. Then we had, of course, the Sino-Indian border clash in the last couple of weeks. And Beijing is not talking about their casualties very much at all, and we don't even know how many casualties they suffered, but that is an indicator to me that the Communist Chinese People's Liberation Army didn't fare too well in their encounter with the Indian Army. And then on top of all of that, there was the discovery of massive gold fraud that occurred in China. Basically tungsten bars that were wrapped in a thin sheet of gold or gold foil or something were used to collateralize loans. But the problem is the loans that were collateralized with fake gold were in excess of $3 billion US. Okay, now, folks, that means China's in a lot of trouble. So now on top of this, and I'm going to read this whole article. I'm not going to skip any paragraphs. I'm just going to let you put all of this article in the context that I just read. And I'm going to end today's news and views with some questions because I honestly don't know what to make of this. I'm almost afraid to give you my usual high octane speculation because there's so many different ways you can read this. So, put your comments, your reading of what's going on in the comments because this is a whopper doozy. It's an article from RT and it's titled Suspected Case. Listen, folks, suspected case of bubonic plague registered in China days after Mongolian outbreak. Now, this is dateline July 5th. In other words, just 3 days ago. And I'm going to read this whole article from RT. Quote, a suspected case of bubonic plague has been registered in China's north, according to local health authorities. The news comes after 2 similar cases were detected in neighboring Mongolia. The case was registered at a hospital in China's Inner Mongolia region, its health commission stated in a statement on Sunday. This prompted a third-level warning of a potential epidemic in the region. The alert comes into force immediately and will be in place until the end of this year. It's believed the patient in question is suffering from the bubonic form, which causes swollen lymph nodes and is considered to be the most easily treated variant of the disease. The plague also has a pneumonic and an extra deadly septicemic form that can kill a victim within a day. Earlier this week, 2 people also tested positive for the bubonic plague in neighboring Mongolia. As the coronavirus pandemic continues to rage, I would say scam plan-demic continues to rage, the potential return of the dreaded plague is definitely the last thing the world needs. So far, COVID-19 has infected nearly 11.5 million people. Now remember, this is RT, killing more than 530,000 of them. Yet the toll from coronavirus is dwarfed by that of the plague, which has caused pandemics at least 3 times in the course of history. It has an extremely high mortality rate at around 95% and caused the deaths of tens of millions before the healthcare evolved enough to treat it. The last such pandemic was in the 19th century, and it hit China and India particularly hard. Between 1,000 and 2,000 cases of the plague are still registered worldwide each year, with many of them originating in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, unquote. And that's the article. And incidentally, we've had cases in this country now of the plague breaking out among the homeless in Los Angeles and other places on the West Coast. So it's not rare in that sense. It's happened here, but now it's happening in China. And it's following on all these other things. Now, my question to you, and they come down to basically 3. Is this simply a natural outbreak? Well, actually 4. Is this simply a natural outbreak? Or assuming it's not, we have 3 other questions. Firstly, was coronavirus really a rehearsal for this? In other words, this is a much more serious threat if it should get out of control. This is much more serious. In fact, in this country, I don't know, I know a lot of you are in Europe, some of you in Africa, some of you in the Pacific Basin. So at least here, the statistics, while more and more cases keep getting diagnosed, the actual mortality rate is falling off as a percentage of cases because the mortality rate has remained more or less the same. So in other words, we're diagnosing more cases, but the thing that they're not talking about on the media is the death rate is actually dwindling, okay? So something is going on, and one of my suspicions is that maybe the coronavirus story was kind of a dress rehearsal for something much bigger, and how to handle pandemics, I don't know. My second question, and it's a big one, and I've been blogging about this possibility on my website for about the last week. You can check the blogs, because it sure looks an awful lot to me like there is a covert hot war going on right now. Let's recall that one of the hot spots of plague outbreak when this whole coronavirus thing got started was Iran. And now there's explosions going on at Iranian facilities that sound to me like we're watching some sort of covert war. We're watching China being slammed by record flooding. And yes, I do suspect some sort of weather manipulation or modification, because it's coming at, pardon me, I got to get my handkerchief. It's coming at too convenient a time when the Chinese government is hard pressed from a multitude of quarters. You know, I reviewed some of these things, the gold fraud, the flooding, and so on and so forth. So I'm wondering if there's actually some sort of covert war being waged on China. Now, I realize 1 or 2 cases of bubonic plague in China or Mongolia is not yet a crisis. but it could certainly mushroom into a crisis, especially given the Chinese population density and so on and so forth. But now there's a third question I have to ask, and this one takes me back to the history that I've kind of briefly outlined in my book, The Financial Vipers of Venice, because I pointed out there that there was an outbreak of plague in Europe that had apparently been brought to Europe on Venetian ships that ran concurrently with the bankers on the Rialto, the Venetian bankers, waging an all-out economic war on their Florentine competition. Remember those big Florentine companies? Basically, they were multinational companies of the day. They were nothing like the size of a modern multinational, but nevertheless, they conducted trade and commerce with a multitude of nations and were rather successful at it. I'm thinking of the Bardi and Peruzzi companies in particular. Well, Venice waged an all-out financial war on Florence concurrently with this outbreak of plague. And there are some people who have suggested that the outbreak of that plague was not accidental. In other words, it was a medieval form of biowarfare. And if you don't think that ancient or medieval society were not capable of that type of biological warfare, they most certainly were, and they did do it. So I have to wonder if, looking now at this story that's emerging, and let's hope it doesn't emerge any further, I have to wonder, with this and with the economic dislocation that has been, in all intentions and purposes, deliberately caused by local, state, and in some cases national governments around the world locking their populations down. And that has, of course, led to some economic dislocation and chaos in some cases. And I have to wonder if the plague is coupled to some sort of financial reset, just like we saw in the 13th and 14th centuries in Europe with this competition between Venice and Florence and the concurrence of the plague at certain stages of that competition, which ultimately served, by the way, to benefit the Venetian bankers. So I'm wondering if we're looking at a plague and reset, financial reset scenario. Certainly the financial community is talking about some sort of financial reset. And we hear the talk in the media, particularly in this country and Canada, about the plans of Bill Gates to basically vaccinate everybody against coronavirus. And in the process of doing so, create a vaccine tracking implant in those people who receive the vaccine. And this, incidentally, on top of a narrative which is trying to discredit hydroxychloroquine as a prophylactic and in some cases as an actual cure for coronavirus. And of course, hydroxychloroquine has been around for a long time. It's a fairly, harmless drug from what I've read about it. And it's cheap. It's much cheaper than trying to develop a vaccine. So something to me is looking like we're watching the use of plague for financial reset. Now, coronavirus looks to me like it's fizzling. But if you get bubonic plague, particularly in its pneumonic or septicemic fashion, being transmitted around the globe deliberately, I think you can create enough chaos globally to witness a possibility of a reset, because, of course, these people are just wicked enough to come up with cures for these things and withhold it from people unless people submit to get their vaccine and the tracking mechanism. So a very important story. I'm asking these questions because I haven't yet seen enough about the story or other things to make my mind up one way or another. Is this a purely natural outbreak? Was coronavirus a dress rehearsal for something much bigger and badder? Is someone waging a covert war on China? And is this a scenario of plague and reset, or the last three altogether? I don't know. but I bring it to your attention because I think it's a very, very serious story. It's one worth watching. Now, don't forget, tomorrow, Friday, we have the vid chat at 6:30. I'll be in the chat room early. I'm already getting questions. Remember, the cutoff is tomorrow night at midnight to get your questions in for the vid chat. And remember, again, next week, I'm not going to be doing my daily blogs. I'll be on a much reduced blogging schedule due to having some company coming. And there will be no news and views next week unless I decide to do one late on Friday night next week. So there will be a reduced blog schedule, high possibility of no news and views next week unless it's late. So anyway, that's it, folks. Let me know what you think about what's going on here. I just get the feeling that this is probably not entirely natural. So we'll see you on the flip side, folks. Bye-bye. Stay well, stay safe, and God bless.